Now, the reading before Gordon gives his sermon comes from, it's an excerpt from the letter from a Birmingham jail Dr. King wrote on April 16th, 1963. I'm going to give a little qualifier. Please remember, this is a direct quote. And as such, it is genderized. It may have genderized and racialized vernacular of 1963. So I hope it doesn't offend you all, but there will be things that you might hear that you're not super happy about. Please listen with an open heart. Yeah.
She's hogging the pulpit. You know, husbands and wives do these things, but you got to always wonder which one is the one doing it the most.
True story. True story. Okay. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning of freedom eventually manifests itself, and that is what has happened to the American Negro. Something within has reminded him of his birthright of freedom, and something without has reminded him that it can be gained. Consciously or unconsciously, he has been caught up by the zeitgeist, and with his black brothers of Africa and his brown and yellow brothers of Asia, South America, and the Caribbean, the United States Negro is moving with a sense of great urgency toward the promised land of racial justice. If one recognizes this vital urge that has engulfed the Negro community, one should readily understand why public demonstrations are taking place. The Negro has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations, and he must release them. So let them march. Let him make prayer pilgrimages to the city hall. Let him go on freedom rides and try to understand why he must do so. If his repressed emotions are not released in nonviolent ways, they will seek expression through violence. This is not a threat, but a fact of history.
So, I have not said to my people, get rid of your discontent. Rather, I have tried to say that this normal and healthy discontent can be channeled into creative outlet of nonviolent direct action. And now this approach is being termed extremist. But though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label.
Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the Christian gospel? I bear in the body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. So help me God. And John Bunyan, I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a butchery of my conscience.
And Abraham Lincoln, this nation cannot survive half slave and half free. And Thomas Jefferson, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremist we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or the extension of justice? In that dramatic scene on Calvary's Hill, 3 men were crucified. We must never forget that all 3 were crucified for the same crime, the crime of extremism. 2 were extremists for immorality and thus fell below their environment. The other, Jesus Christ, was an extremist for love, truth, and goodness, and thereby rose above his environment. Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists.
I had hoped that the white moderate would see this. Perhaps I was too optimistic. Perhaps I expected too much. I suppose I should have realized that few members of the oppressor race can understand the deep groans and passionate yearnings of the oppressed race, and still fewer have the vision to see that Injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined action. I am thankful, however, that some of our white brothers and sisters, I should say, in the South have grasped the meaning of this social revolution and committed themselves to it. They are still all too few in quantity, but they are big in quality.
Some, such as Ralph McGill, Lillian Smith, Harry Golden, James McBride Dabbs, Ann Braden, and Sarah Patton Boyle, have written about our struggle in eloquent and prophetic terms. Others have marched with us down nameless streets of the South. They have languished in filthy, roach-infested jails, suffering the abuse and brutality of policemen who view them as dirty, excuse my language, folks, nigger lovers. Unlike so many of their moderate brothers and sisters, they have recognized the urgency of the moment and sensed the need for powerful action. Antidotes to combat the disease of segregation.
Let me take note of my other major disappointment. I have been so greatly disappointed with the white church and its leadership. Of course, there are some notable exceptions. I am not unmindful of the fact that each of you has taken some significant stands on this issue. I commend you, Reverend Stallings, for your Christian stand on this past Sunday in welcoming Negroes to your worship service on a non-segregated basis. I commend the Catholic leaders of this state for integrating Spring Hill College several years ago. But despite these notable exceptions, I must honestly reiterate, I have been disappointed with the church. I do not say this as one of those negative critics who can always find something wrong with the church.
I say this as a minister of the gospel who loves the church, who was nurtured in its bosom, who has been sustained by its spiritual blessings, and who will remain true to it as long as the cord of life shall lengthen. Thus ends our reading from MLK's letter from a Birmingham jail. Have you read it, folks? Most of you are nodding yes. If you haven't read it recently, read it again. Sunday morning is still the most segregated hour of the life of the American people. Now, thankfully, we've got a smattering of the beloved community in this space here today. But trust me, if you go around to temples, mosques, and churches around the nation, you're going to find rather monolithic audiences. When Dr. King speaks about disappointment with the church, he ain't mincing words. It was the truth back then, and it's the truth today. In fact, the use of Christian, Hebraic and Christian scriptures is what gives license to the enslavement of African peoples and the stealing of these two continents here in the Americas. The church has been used. The church has participated. The church, in some measure, if not full measure, is really at fault. A papal bull way back in 1456, something like that, gave license to the enslavement of Africans and the taking of all non-white lands. And the Catholic Church, not to beat up the Catholics, but they were the most powerful church in the world. Then, probably still today. You understand the wealth of the Catholic Church, the power they wield? All right. Let me share with you what I was writing and why I thought about the urgency of now and this reflection on Dr. King, but it's so much more. We're focusing on centering this month. Well, how are you going to center yourself? Well, there's all kinds of ways. But centering on some of the language and life realities of Dr. King is a powerful thing for anybody who's willing to spend that effort, that brain, that time with his words and his reality. out of our individual congregational centering, right? Because each of you in a congregational say, I center myself. Where's my spirit? I'm good with God or Goddess. That's all beautiful and lovely. Yeah, you're supposed to do that work. Unitarian Universalists encourage your individual exploration of theological and spiritual things, right? That's what we're about. Not telling you what to believe, but that maybe we encourage you to hold on to something or find something that might lend some support for your life. Betty, the humanist. Right on, right? Whoever's a humanist, wherever you are on the spiritual spectrum. But I'm compelled to say there's so much more than your individual spiritual centering. There are those principles that ground our faith. And the first one being inherent worth and dignity. Well, how can we ever get to the actualized living of inherent worth and dignity of all human beings when you don't even see, not you specifically, but in general, people don't see the other? I know we're concerned about the Ukraine. I'm deeply concerned about the Ukraine. I'm also concerned about the 700,000 deaths in Ethiopia that seem to go unnoticed by the vast majority of Americans. They're trying to cancel the New York Times. I'm concerned about the people at the border, and it's not just, it's barely Mexicans anymore. It's people from Central America, Africa, and the Caribbean, all marching their way towards our southern border, hoping to get in this nation so they might have a modicum of decency in their lives. Let me share with you a piece that I found. It's entitled, Where Are the White Churches? I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than justice. And those are the words of Dr. King, right? And this author goes on to say, during the civil rights movements of the 50s and 60s, numerous black clergy, including Martin Luther King Jr., appealed to the white churches for support and active engagement. The movement hoped for financial and political and moral support from the white churches. Much of the white church's response or lack of response was either silence or outright disdain for Dr. King and the other leaders of the civil rights movement. This is not to be ignored. The courageous engagement by some whites who marched, sat in, and spoke out publicly for the cause. Some white clergy, moved by the call of prophetic involvement, paid the price with their lives and their livelihoods. Our very own James Reeb, the martyr, white Unitarian minister who paid the ultimate price, lost his life, right? Much of the white church hunkered down in fear and anger, disoriented by the social upheavals, challenging the assumptions of white privilege. Reading the climate in their congregations, many clergy chose to steer clear of a prophetic role in favor of maintaining comfortable relationships with their congregants. They didn't know me, huh? I wish I had been white back then. See, I'm a Negro from Harlem. I'm a black man turned white. But if I could have been what they used to say, the spook in the room, I said, if I could have been the snowflake in the room, I would have given them hell. Huh? Some people have to have the audacity to speak the truth to power. Doesn't matter where you are. Doesn't matter when you are. It only matters that you have convictions in your heart and spirit to tell you about right from wrong. I wanted to talk to you about Dr. King, but not just Dr. King. I wanted to talk to you about the intersection of Dr. King and some of the women that were involved in the civil rights movement. See, so often the men get all the praise. And of course, Dr. King deserves so much praise. He paid the ultimate price, didn't he? His children have suffered. Poor Coretta Scott King, my. What a life. You share your husband with the society, and then you have them turn him into something that he wasn't. For while the speech in Washington about children of all colors getting along and playing together is important, Martin was really focused on transformation of a whole society, and it wasn't about children playing together. Let's have a Martin Luther King sale day. Some of y'all going shopping this weekend? Dr. King wasn't about commercialism, about the economics of the nation and how we can cha-ching, make some more money. He gave away almost every dime he ever earned. Poor Coretta and those children. They had to create a legacy. They pumped up the volume on MLK and found a way to live comfortably, but it wasn't because Martin was about money. But let me share some of these names of women that I think you may know, but you might not be aware, right? Might not be aware of them. And I'll start here. Throughout the history of the United States, Black women in particular have participated across most social movements. These women found ways to organize and lead for a more just and equal society, not just for themselves, but for all peoples. When discussing Black women's leadership and organizing efforts during the Black civil rights movement, it becomes clear how often their contributions are overlooked. While countless women played important roles at various points during the freedom struggle, it is men who still receive more attention. I bet you if we said name the 5 most important people, most of us are going to name mostly men, right? Andrew Young, Ralph Abernathy, Malcolm X. Yeah, well, we're going to have a Malcolm and Martin sermon. Anyway, men receive the lion's share, don't they? But many African American women operated as leaders on the local and grassroots level, serving as a bridge between national organizations and others. Their labor and sacrifice kept the movement going. According to scholar Belinda Robinette, much of the labor of the modern civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s was organized around gender. Men, particularly religious figures, came to serve as formal leaders with the movement then coalesced around at the national level. This meant that while Black women took on the important strategic roles at the local level, they were often prevented from having a more visible role or accessing the highest levels of leadership in their national organizing. Black women's activities, folks, need to be equalized, if not lifted up and above and beyond what some of these men did in their grandstanding. It's a fabulous thing to give a speech and get all the accolades. It's another thing to have organized the whole event, paid the dues for getting folks there. We forget far too often. Mainstream histories. I don't know what you learned in school, but I didn't learn a whole lot about these women of the struggle. Mainstream histories of the civil rights movement tend to praise a certain type of Black woman. I'm treading on thin ice now. Women such as Rosa Parks are reduced to limited images of obedient femininity or of accidental matriarch. Rosa was no accident. She had trained and studied and prepared for years. And if you're ever in Atlanta and you go to the King Center, and I please encourage you to go to the King Center if you're ever in Atlanta. Rosa's got her own room. She's that important. This phenomenon of rendering Black women's civil rights activities as two-dimensional steals their thunder. It steals their agency. These women aren't seen as the whole human beings that they were, mothers, daughters, organizers, preachers, teachers. Huh? The historian Jean Theo Harris terms this gendered silences. Strange how black men can go through all they go through. And trust me, when my skin was black, I used to get pulled out of my car on a regular basis. Where'd you get this car? Where you going? Huh? I haven't been pulled over since my skin turned this color, have I? It's amazing. I'm driving while white now. That's all they can see, the whites of my palms or my hands, right? But this gendered silence within the larger context of history is disgusting. Black men ought to know better. Black historians ought to know better. White historians, well, we know how most white historians write history. The victor writes the narrative in ways that presents themselves in the best light. It's not just a white thing. I'm sure if we go to China or India, there'll be a similar narrative by those groups within China or India, or in the African states. I'm 33% Nigerian. There are over 100 tribes in Nigeria, but the Igbo or whichever one is in power is going to write the narrative. If you know anything about the Biafran War, somebody's going to write the narrative in a way that makes themselves look good. Shame on them. History is history. Speak the truth, or don't speak at all. The women of the organizing and leadership teams of the civil rights movement need to be memorialized. I don't know where it will happen, but I'm going to advocate for it. Where's the civil rights memorial for the women? Let's put it in Washington on the Mall. Let's put it in Atlanta. Let's put it in Birmingham. Ooh, that storm just hit Montgomery. Was it Montgomery? Selma. Selma just got tore up. Coretta Scott King, like Rosa Parks, has seen her activism erased and reduced to being Dr. King's wife and widow. Her activism began before she was married to Martin. Heck, she might have pushed him to do more than we'll ever know, because a wife can really push you sometimes. Do the right thing, husband. Not enough mention has been focused on the roles played by women in the struggle. And I just want to lift up some of the names of people, because time is short and this could be an ongoing service, but time is short, and I want y'all to hear some of these names so you'll do some homework on your own. There's going to be a list on the social justice table that Lisa compiled for you, but there's so many people, right? So many. And I didn't get to the Asian or Latina or indigenous women that were part of this, but they're there too, and they need to be lifted up. Let me tell you this though. There were a group, just like I could beat up the white churches for not doing, because I'm sitting in a room that's predominantly dominated by European Americans, and I'm very intentional about European American and not calling you white folks. White has a very difficult narrative associated with it. So I'm going to call you all European Americans. I must acknowledge the participation of European American women in the struggle for justice, because they were there. Do you know their names? Say her name. Who's that white woman you know of? Mother Jones. All right. Look, I am married to this powerful European American woman, and I can't rest well if I don't equalize things. So there were powerful white women in this movement. And this denomination, Lisa spoke about Viola Liuzzo. I always bring up her name. Is she from Detroit? I thought she was from Queens. Okay. She gave everything for the cause, left her children motherless because she so believed in the cause. 5 children, I believe. So the truth of the struggle isn't merely a black and white thing. It's a multicultural, multicolored, multi-gendered, multi-oriented, can I say it that way? Orientation place of struggle and commitment to justice. Let me lift up the name Anne Braden. Do you know her name? Say her name, say her name. Where is she from, Louisville? Anne Braden. Keep her on your lips. If you don't know that white woman, get in touch with her. Lillian Smith. Do you know her name? Y'all got to check into your sisters, you white women. Know your sisters of the struggle. They weren't just in the struggle for white women's efforts, in the struggle for humanity. Sarah Patton Boyle, anybody? Okay, so let me give you a little bit. Anne McCarty Braden was an American civil rights journalist and educator dedicated to the cause of racial equality. She and her husband bought a suburban house for an African-American couple during Jim Crow. White neighbors burned crosses and bombed the house. During McCarthyism, Anne was charged with sedition. She wrote and organized for the Southern Civil Rights Movement before violations became national news. Anne was among the nation's most outspoken white anti-racist activists. Say her name, say her name. Anne Braden. She's got a center in Louisville, and while you're there, see the Muhammad Ali Center too. And the food is awesome off the hook if you like Southern cuisine. All right. Lillian Smith was one of the first prominent white Southerners to denounce racial segregation openly. Lillian Smith. And to work actively against the entrenched and often brutality enforced by the world of Jim Crow. From as early as the 1930s. Some of y'all grandparents weren't even born then, were they? Well, we got some older folks in here. Maybe your grandparents. My mama and daddy was born so far back, I don't even know what era I'm supposed to be seeing through. But anyway, in the 1930s, Lillian Smith was doing the work. She argued that Jim Crow was evil. She said segregation is spiritual lynching. Segregation is spiritual lynching. This nation remains a segregated, deeply segregated nation. How many teachers know about the non-white children being in inner city schools? Oh, Christian academies, my ass. Excuse me. Shameful. Or lily white suburbs, right? Oh, we got to run from them people. Lillian Smith said that spiritual segregation and its lynching after effects leads to a social and moral decay of the nation. People who don't know one another. Children who have never known someone of another race, class, creed. This is problematic. Lastly, Sarah Lindsay Patton, Patty Boyle as she was known, was an American author and civil rights activist from Virginia during the civil rights movement. She is the author of The Desegregated Heart and various articles and books about race relations in the heart of the Confederacy, Old Virginia. Old Virginia. Virginia. Boyle was a faculty member's wife, Professor Roger Boyle at the University of Virginia. TJ school. I know they were mad as heck for this woman to be talking about things that, we got to keep them Negroes down. TJ, Thomas Jefferson, said Negroes were not the equal of white people, although he laid up with that black woman for like 50 years and had 5 babies with her, practicing. If a Negro wasn't even a human being, What is it when you have sex with an animal? Oh, that's what TJ was practicing. Take that statue down. Huh? Take him off on money. Well, money's dirty, but take him off. He's brilliant and he's twisted in the same breath. He didn't free his own children. He has the audacity to talk about liberty and justice for all? Are you kidding me? Deep in our hearts. Come on, sing with me. I do believe that we shall overcome someday. I had 6 black women I wanted to lift up for you, but it's all right. Ella Baker. Amelia Boynton. Who else you got? Claudette Coleman. Dorothy Height. You know Dorothy Height? She was powerful. She gave us a Unitarian Universalist minister, her nephew, Dan Aldridge. Fannie Lou Hamer. Septima Poinsett Clark. Listen, this could be a focus on ministry for us if we dared to go there. Women of the struggle. Form a group. Let's study them. We've got work to do, people, and we shall overcome. Thank you for your time today.